Hello again. In this demo, I'm going to show you some of the options we have when we're running geoprocessing tools. These options are called environment variables, and you'll see them in anything from operating systems to programming languages to ArcGIS. So you might recognize this map document from the last demo that I did on running geoprocessing tools. But there's one key difference here, which is that there's this yellow, somewhat transparent box. And for this demo, that's our study area. That's the area that we're actually interested in. But notice that once again, I'm using the North America polygons and the South America polygons, and that they're split into two separate feature classes. As I said in the last demo, we might want to merge those two sets of polygons into one feature class so that we can do one analysis on them. But in this case, I don't really care about lots of areas of those feature classes. I really care about what's in my study area. So we're going to explore environment variables and see how I can use those to only merge the parts that are in my study area. So if I bring up the Union tool again, I can select my input features once more, North America and South America, and again, it selects an output location for me by default. But notice the Environments button down here at the bottom. I didn't point that out before, but that's there on every tool, and it's also available application-wide from the Geoprocessing Environments option. And if I set it just for this tool by clicking this button, I get a whole list of settings here. And I'm going to point out just a few of these. A lot of them aren't relevant to you yet because you don't know the GIS concepts that underlay them. But the workspace settings, the output coordinates, and the processing extent settings are all relevant to you. And we can use those to control our analysis. So you might notice that the current workspace here is where it's putting my output feature class by default. That's the same as my default geodatabase. And if I set this, or if I change this here, it's going to do its work in a different spot for me. Another set of options we have is the output coordinates option. So if, say, my North America and South America data were in different projections, I could specify here the output projection that I want them to come out as. I could select the same as a specific layer, or I could do as specified below, and I can click this button here to select the projection that we want to use. Now, back to the question at hand. How do I union only the features that are in my study area? I do that with the extent environment variable. So by default, it uses all of the features that are in any of the data sets involved in the operation. That's that it also unions the input's extents. But if I really wanted to specify it, I could use a same as layer study area. And it gives me a set of coordinates here that it's expecting to use for the extent environment variable. And now if I click OK to save my environment variables, and double check that everything looks right in the union box, and then I click OK, it runs the union tool, see there down at the bottom again, and gives me the outputs. This might not look quite like you expected, right? I have a lot of stuff that's outside of my study area, but stop and think about it for a moment. What could possibly be going on that's selecting features like Alaska that are way outside of the main study area, and the rest of the United States, and Brazil, Peru, and Ecuador over here? Instead of breaking up the features and putting lines through the United States and cropping it off like we might get if we did some sort of intersection tool, what ArcGIS does is at the beginning of the analysis it says which of the features in North America are touching the study area and which of the features in South America are touching the study area, and it pulls out those features and then it runs the geoprocessing tool union on those subsets that it pulled. So that makes sense here. The United States is technically within the study area, as are Brazil, Peru, and Ecuador. So those features get pulled and then used in the union operation. But what about Alaska? What's going on there? This is a concept we haven't talked about yet called a multi-part polygon, where you can have many distinct polygons that act as one record and one polygon in the attribute table. And I can verify this if I use the Select Features tool, and if I click in the United States, Alaska gets selected too. It's one polygon to ArcGIS, even though visually it's multiple polygons. So now that we've seen an environment variable, the extent setting in action, what do you think that environment variables are in general? We didn't really define that up front. Stop and think about that for a moment. How do you conceptualize an environment variable? I would personally say that you can think of an environment variable as just another type of settings that affects geoprocessing operations. They could show up in the Union tool itself as an option here, but they're much more broadly applicable, so they get set in this environment settings pane. They affect geoprocessing as a whole and not just this tool. And another reflection of that is that if we were to set geoprocessing environments in here, and I were to set processing extent to the same as layer study area like we did for the tool, this would affect any geoprocessing tool that we run. It would be the default. So that's where it's an environment variable, is it sets up the environment of ArcGIS for all of the geoprocessing tools that run to follow. So now you have an understanding of environment variables and how to use them to constrain or change your geoprocessing operations in ArcGIS. We'll cover additional environment variables as we cover the topics that support them, but for now you can use environment variables to do things like changing your working locations, changing the projections that your geoprocessing tools are working in, or constraining your analysis window with the extent environment variable. I encourage you to go take a look in ArcGIS at the environments yourself and play around with it. See how your analysis comes out when you make different settings with it. Okay, enjoy it, and I'll see you in the next video.